It happened on a Thursday. I remember because I'd just come off a double shift at the hospital. I work as a pediatric nurse at St. Luke's and my feet were aching. My scrubs smelled like hand sanitizer and formula. All I wanted was a hot shower, my couch, and silence. I pulled into my driveway, grabbed my bag from the passenger seat, and started walking to my front door. It was already getting dark and the porch light hadn't come on yet. I remember thinking I needed to replace the bulb. Then I saw her, a little girl, 6, maybe 7 years old, standing on my front step, soaking wet from the rain. Brown curls stuck to her cheeks, and her arms were wrapped around her chest like she was trying to keep herself from falling apart. She looked up as I got closer. And then she ran. She ran straight at me with this broken, desperate expression. Before I could react, she threw her arms around my waist and buried her face in my coat. "Mommy," she said. "Mommy, I missed you so much." My heart stopped. I didn't move. I didn't know if I should. I just stood there, frozen, trying to process what I'd just heard. She clung to me like she hadn't seen me in years, like I was her entire world. I looked down at her. "Sweetheart, I think you're confused." She pulled back just enough to look up at me, and her eyes filled with confusion and fear. "It's me," she whispered. "I'm your daughter." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I live alone," I said gently. "I don't have a daughter." Her eyes welled with tears again. "But you do. Nana said you'd come back." I stepped back. She tried to hold on to me. My mind was racing, but nothing made sense. This wasn't a prank. There was no one else around, no camera crew, no parent calling her away. Just this little girl shaking, soaked to the bone, staring at me like I'd just broken her heart. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. My hands were trembling. I told them a child had shown up at my house, said I was her mother, and she seemed lost. The dispatcher asked me to stay with her until someone arrived. I wrapped her in the blanket I kept in my car and led her inside. She followed me without hesitation. She sat on my couch like she'd done it 100 times before, like she belonged there. "Can I have hot cocoa?" she asked softly, eyes darting to the kitchen. Sure, I said, even though my entire body felt like it was floating outside itself. While the kettle boiled, I kept watching her. Something about her felt familiar, but it had to be in my head. I work with kids every day. Maybe she reminded me of someone from the hospital. Maybe I'd seen her before without realizing it. I told myself that. The police arrived 15 minutes later. Officer Monroe, a kind woman in her 30s, asked all the right questions. The girl said her name was Lena. She didn't know her last name. She didn't have an address. But she insisted, again and again, that I was her mother. "I know you," Lena said when Monroe asked who I was. "She sings when she makes soup. She hums when she cleans the windows. She has a scar on her elbow from the doggy at the lake." I froze. I do have a scar on my elbow. I got it when I was 10, visiting my aunt's cabin. A neighbor's dog jumped on me by the water. I hadn't thought about that in years. I asked Officer Monroe if maybe she'd been coached, or if someone had given her information to say, but no one had come forward. No missing child report matched her description. No one seemed to be looking for her. That night, as the officers drove her to Child Protective Services, Lena looked out the back window and mouthed, "Don't forget me." I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I kept seeing her face, hearing her voice. "Mommy, I missed you so much. I've never had children. I've never been pregnant. There are no gaps in my memory. Nothing like that. So how could a child I've never met know that scar? How could she know the humming? How could she run into my arms like she'd done it 100 times before? Something was wrong. And in my gut, I knew this wasn't the end of it. It was only the beginning. Before all of this, my life was quiet. Not lonely, not sad, just still. I lived in a 2-bedroom townhouse in a neighborhood tucked between a forest preserve and a grocery store. Nothing special. Clean siding, beige walls, mismatched furniture I had picked out slowly over the years. I liked it. It felt safe, predictable. I'm 35 and I've worked as a pediatric nurse at St. Luke's Hospital for almost a decade. I chose pediatrics because it gave me a sense of purpose. Kids are honest. They don't pretend. You can tell when they're hurting, and when they laugh, it's real. There's no game. I love that. People always assumed I became a nurse because I wanted children. I don't. Or at least, I never thought I did. I was engaged once, a few years ago. Daniel and I had talked about adoption, but we were in different places. He wanted a big family. I wanted stability. Eventually, that tore us apart. After we split, I threw myself into work. Night shifts, overtime, holiday coverage. I took it all. It was easier to be busy. At home, I lived alone. My only real family is my mom, Dina, who adopted me when I was 3. She's retired now, lives about an hour away. We talk often, but not deeply. She's practical, reserved, loving in her own way, but not overly affectionate. I never pushed her to share much about my early childhood, and she never offered. It worked for both of us. My adoption was closed. I've never met my biological parents, and I never felt a strong urge to go digging. All I knew was that I had been surrendered as a toddler, no known relatives, no medical history. I filled out every health form as unknown. I used to joke that I came from the void, but the truth was, I liked not knowing. It gave me space to define myself. I liked my life the way it was. Simple. My days were filled with bandages and fevers and teaching scared parents how to swaddle. Then I'd come home, change into sweatpants, feed my dog Hazel, and fall asleep to old detective shows. I wasn't chasing anything. I wasn't waiting for a miracle. I was content. That's what made the little girl at my door so jarring. It wasn't just the shock of the moment. It was how quickly it pierced the structure I'd spent years building. After the officers left with Lena, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the floor for what felt like an hour. Hazel, my black lab mix, rested her head on my knee. Sensing something was off, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I told myself I had just been tired, and maybe that girl had mistaken me for someone else. But no matter how I tried to explain it, the image of her face, full of certainty, wouldn't leave me. The next morning, I called my mom. "Hey," I said, trying to sound normal, "something strange happened last night." She was quiet while I explained. I told her everything. The rain, the little girl, what she said, how she clung to me like I was the only person left in her world. I expected her to laugh or gasp or offer some kind of rational theory, but she didn't. Instead, she said, "What was her name?" "Lena," I answered. She said her name was Lena. There was a pause. Not long, but just enough. Then she said, "That's odd." "Yeah," I replied, waiting for her to say more. "You okay?" "Of course," she said quickly, just surprised. "That's not something that happens every day." She changed the subject after that, asked about work, told me she was going to the farmer's market later. It was the kind of pivot you make when you don't want to talk about something. I knew the signs. I'd done it plenty of times myself. Still, something about her voice stuck with me. It had an edge to it, something I hadn't heard before. After we hung up, I pulled out an old photo album. Most of the pictures were of my childhood, birthday parties, school plays, camping trips. I scanned every photo, every face, looking for something that might connect to Lena. Nothing did, but that night, when I got ready for bed, I stood in front of the mirror and really looked at myself, my eyes, my nose, my hairline. Then I pictured Lena again. She looked like me, not a little, a lot. It didn't make sense. There was no way. I hadn't forgotten a pregnancy. I wasn't some Lifetime movie. I had no missing years, no trauma-induced blackout. I'd had full control over my body and my memory. This couldn't be real, and yet something in my gut told me I needed answers. Something in her voice when she said "Mommy," something in the way she knew about my scar, something in the silence on the other end of the phone when I told my mother her name. I didn't know what was happening yet, but I knew my life wasn't going to be the same. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I had dreamed it all. I half expected to walk downstairs and find my house exactly as I'd left it. No small shoes by the door, no folded blanket on the couch, no trace of the little girl who had called me Mommy. But the blanket was still there. And when I pulled it off the cushions, I found a single blue hair tie tangled in the fabric, small, stretched out, and knotted with a strand of fine, light brown hair. It hadn't been a dream. I sat down, holding the hair tie between my fingers, and tried to slow my thoughts. I needed answers, logic, something I could point to and say, "That explains it." I drove to the police station that afternoon. I needed to know more. Officer Monroe met me in the front lobby. She recognized me immediately. "Hi, Nurse Carr," she said with a tired smile. "You okay?" I wasn't, but I nodded. I just wanted to check on the little girl, I said. Lena. She's with CPS now, Monroe said. She's safe. Quiet but not distressed. We're trying to locate family, but so far nothing's come up in the system. No match in the missing children database? Nothing. She's a ghost. I blinked. What about her last name? She didn't give one, and we haven't found any record that matches her fingerprints. She's young, not old enough to be in school databases yet. It's rare, but not impossible. The officer paused. Then she added, She kept asking for you last night. I exhaled slowly, trying to ignore the thump in my chest. She said you sing when you cook, that you hum when you clean the windows, that you have a scar on your elbow from a dog bite. Her voice dropped. Is any of that true? I didn't answer right away. She saw it in my face. I know this sounds crazy, I said finally, but what if she really is related to me? Monroe didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. We can do a DNA test, she said. Standard practice when a child claims a familial connection and we have no other leads. But I've never had a child, I said quietly. There's no chance. None. Monroe tilted her head. Have you ever done genetic testing before? Any idea about your biological family tree? Number Y was adopted at 3. Closed file. I've never really tried to open it. She nodded. Maybe it's time. She gave me the information for the Child Protective Services office. I called them the next day and scheduled the DNA test. They asked if I was willing to be a temporary contact in case of emergency. I hesitated but agreed. They took my cheek swab on Friday morning. It was routine, impersonal, clinical. I went back to work that evening, but my mind wasn't with the patients. It was back at my front door, replaying Lena's voice over and over. That weekend, I visited my mother. She met me at the porch like she always did, apron on, smelling faintly of vanilla and cinnamon. She hugged me, but it felt shorter than usual, tighter. Inside, she poured us tea and sat across from me at the table. Why don't you tell me what's really bothering you? She asked. So I did. All of it. I told her about the police report, the DNA test, and how nothing about this situation made sense. I told her that the girl had details she shouldn't know, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been hidden from me, something important. She sat silently through most of it, her hands wrapped around her mug. When I finished, she looked up and said, You're getting too close. I blinked. What does that mean? You're letting yourself believe something that can't be true. I'm not making it up. I didn't imagine her. She exists. She knows things about me that no stranger could possibly know. She stared into her tea. Her fingers tightened around the mug. You don't remember much from before I adopted you, she said. No, I don't. But what are you saying? Are you saying there's something I should remember? She didn't answer. Mama. Her eyes flicked up to mine, but they were blank. Guarded. I think there's something you're not telling me, I said, and I think it matters now. Still, she stayed silent. I left shortly after that. The visit had become unbearable. The tea turned cold on the table, and the goodbye hug never happened. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Hazel snored beside me, unaware that the world I thought I lived in had started to crack. I didn't know who Lena was or where she came from, but I knew this wasn't a coincidence. I knew she hadn't chosen my door at random. Someone had sent her, or she had remembered me from something buried deep. And if she was mine, if there was even the smallest chance, I had to find out the truth, even if it meant everything I believed about my past was a lie. I kept telling myself it was just a mix-up, a procedural glitch, a traumatized child's desperate attachment. But every time I looked at the photo of Lena that the CPS worker had emailed me, just for identification purposes, she said, I felt something tighten in my chest. I stared at that face longer than I meant to. Her eyes looked like mine, not just the color, the shape, the expression. The way she tilted her head slightly left when she was unsure of something. I could have ignored it, could have chalked it up to coincidence or the tricks our minds play when we're emotionally overwhelmed, but I'm a nurse. My job is to look beyond symptoms and find the source. I know when something doesn't add up, and nothing about this made sense. 3 days after the DNA swab, I called the CPS office. The test results weren't in yet, but the social worker, Karen, told me Lena was still not speaking to anyone but a single case manager and continued asking for me. "She's extremely attached to you," Karen said, "almost like she's been with you before. Are you sure you've never met this child?" I told her I was sure, but even as I said it, I wasn't confident anymore. I sat in my car outside the hospital after that call and opened the Notes app on my phone. I made a list of every possibility. Maybe I had a half-sibling I didn't know about. Maybe Lena was a cousin's child, and my resemblance triggered something. But the scar, the humming, the voice, those weren't guesses. Those were memories. That afternoon, I filed a request to open my sealed adoption records. Oregon law had recently changed, making access easier, but the process still took time. I paid the fee, filled out the paperwork, and waited. Back at work, I couldn't focus. My hands moved on autopilot while I checked vitals and changed IVs, but my mind stayed locked on the girl who said she was mine. I found myself humming under my breath more often. I hadn't even realized it until a colleague pointed it out. "You always hum when you're stressed," he said. Didn't know that was a thing. Apparently, it was. That night, I drove to my mother's house again. I didn't tell her I was coming. When she opened the door, she looked surprised, but not shocked. "I need to ask you something," I said, "and I need you to tell me the truth this time." She didn't invite me in. She just stood there on the porch, her hands gripping the doorframe. "I filed for my records," I told her. "I'll know soon enough, but I'd rather hear it from you first." Her eyes flickered, then fell. "Tell me what happened," I said, "please." She stepped aside and motioned for me to come in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one I'd eaten at for most of my life. The wood was scratched in the same place where I used to do homework. She made us tea. She always did when the conversation was about to get hard. "You were 15, she began, her voice steady but low. "It was late summer. You'd been hanging around with a boy from the next town over. I didn't know how serious it was until it was too late. I didn't interrupt her. I just listened. You got pregnant. You were scared. I was terrified. We went to the doctor, and I'll never forget the way they looked at me, like I was a failure for letting it happen. I didn't remember any of this, not even pieces. You went into labor early," she continued. "There were complications. You were unconscious for hours. When you woke up, the doctor told us the baby hadn't made it." My breath caught in my throat. "I believed them," she said. "I thought I had lost my grandchild. I thought you had lost your baby. I thought keeping that pain from you was the kindest thing I could do." I stared at her, searching her face for any sign of deceit. "Now," she whispered, "I don't know. I don't know if they lied to me. I don't know if someone made a decision for us. Why wouldn't they tell you the truth?" She shook her head. "I was young. I wasn't your legal guardian yet. The system was a mess. They said it was better not to complicate things. They said the baby wouldn't have survived, and I wanted to believe them." I stood up, my tea untouched. I couldn't sit there any longer. "She's mine," I said. "Isn't she?" My mother's eyes filled with tears. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. When I got home that night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, holding the old baby blanket my mom had kept in a box, labeled Elena Infant. It used to be mine. I wondered if Lena had one like it. I wondered who had held her on her first night in the world. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a notification from the CPS office. The DNA results were ready. The email was simple, a subject line that read, "DNA test results, case number 7829, CLC, no urgency, no warning, just words that sat there, waiting to change everything." I didn't open it right away. I stared at it while I sat on my couch, Hazel curled against my leg. The house was silent except for the low hum of the fridge and my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. I clicked. It was all there in black and white, processed by an independent lab contracted through the Department of Human Services, matched against my genetic material. The conclusion was at the bottom of the page. Probability of biological maternity, 99.97%. I didn't breathe. My eyes scanned the sentence again and again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something more reasonable. There was no chance of a mix-up. This was a professional lab. There were chain of custody protocols. The margin of error didn't exist in numbers like that. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, then back to the living room, then to the hallway and stopped in front of the mirror. I looked at myself like I was seeing a stranger, a 35-year-old woman who had just learned she had a daughter who had been taken from her without her knowledge, a daughter she didn't remember giving birth to. I called the CPS office immediately. Karen answered. "We just got the results too," she said, her voice gentler than usual. "I'm assuming you've seen them." "Yes." She hesitated. "Are you okay?" "Number, but I want to see her." "We'll arrange a supervised meeting first," she said. "Standard procedure. But if you're open to pursuing custody, we'll begin the paperwork." "When?" "Tomorrow morning, if you're ready." I didn't hesitate. "I'll be there." That night, I didn't sleep again. I pulled out every journal, every photo, every keepsake from my teenage years, trying to find something that might explain the memory loss, but it was blank. My 17th birthday, my high school prom, my first job, all those moments were vivid. But between August and November of the year I turned 15, there were almost no entries. When I called my mother and told her the results, she went quiet. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I believed what they told me." "I didn't know," I said. "I didn't even know what I lost." "I know." The next morning, I walked into the Child Services building with hands so cold they barely worked. Karen met me in the lobby and led me down a hallway to a small, bright room filled with toys and books. The moment I stepped through the door, Lena looked up from a beanbag in the corner. Her whole body lit up. She jumped to her feet and ran to me before anyone could say a word. I dropped to my knees and caught her. "I knew it," she whispered. "I told them. I told everyone." I held her tightly. I didn't care about the social worker watching us or the camera in the corner. I didn't care that we were strangers on paper. My arms knew how to hold her. "I missed you," she said again, softer this time. "I'm here," I said. "I'm here now." We spent 2 hours in that room. We played a board game and she asked if I remembered the lullaby with the moon in it. I didn't, but I said maybe, and she sang part of it for me. I had no memory of it, but something about the rhythm felt oddly familiar, like a song I'd heard once in a dream. She told me her foster home was okay, but it didn't feel like hers. She didn't call it home. She asked if I had a bed for her and if she could meet Hazel. Karen explained the process. Background checks, home visits, temporary custody followed by legal petitioning. It could take weeks or months, but Lena didn't ask about paperwork. She just asked if I'd come back. "I'm not going anywhere," I told her. That night, I sat at my desk and began writing a letter. Not to Lena, not yet, to myself. I needed to put into words what had just unfolded. The loss, the deception, the wonder of it. I needed to understand how I could have lost an entire piece of myself and still function all these years without knowing. I wrote about the way she said my name. Not Mom, not Mama. She called me Mommy, like it had always belonged to me. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't been able to name before. I felt something I'd never felt in my quiet, orderly life. I felt claimed. I wasn't just her mother because of biology or paperwork. I was her mother because she said I was. Because when she saw me, she saw safety. And when I saw her, I saw something I didn't even know I was missing. The truth didn't just change everything. It gave me back something I never knew had been stolen. The first night Lena came home, she fell asleep with her hand wrapped tightly around 2 of my fingers. She didn't ask for a story. She didn't want a nightlight. She just wanted to know I would still be there when she woke up. I sat beside her bed long after her breathing slowed. The house was quiet, but it felt fuller than it ever had. I kept watching her chest rise and fall, terrified that if I blinked too long, she would vanish again. CPS approved emergency placement pending full custody. There were still interviews and visits and evaluations ahead, but she was home. She called it that without hesitation. The second we stepped inside, she walked over to Hazel, petted her gently, then turned to me and said, "She remembers me. I know she does." Maybe she did. Hazel had curled around her like she had always known her. I had rearranged the spare room with soft bedding, night books, and one of my old stuffed animals. Lena hugged it like it was hers. I started humming while I made her dinner, not even thinking about it, and when I turned around, she was smiling. "You still do that," she said. I had never paid attention to how often I hummed. Now I noticed it every time. Over the next few weeks, she told me small things. She remembered a nurse with red hair, a white hallway, a cold room. She remembered holding someone's hand, but she had always thought it was a dream. When she saw me, she said the dream made sense. I didn't try to force memories. I just listened. Sometimes she asked why I didn't come for her sooner. I told her the truth, in simple words, that I hadn't known, that people had lied, that I had been as lost as she was. She didn't cry. She nodded like she understood more than any 6-year-old should. My mother visited after Lena had been home for 2 weeks. She brought cookies and a small necklace that had belonged to her mother. She said Lena should have it now. There was still distance between us, but something had shifted. Maybe it was the way she watched Lena from across the table, a quiet awe in her expression. Maybe it was the apology she gave me before she left. It wasn't dramatic. It was soft and genuine. "I should have fought harder," she said. "I should have asked more questions." "I should have too," I replied. But we were here now, with a second chance neither of us had earned, but both needed. At work, I took a temporary leave. For the first time, I needed time for myself, not to recover, but to grow, to learn how to be a mother in the middle of my life. It was not something I could plan for. It was something I had to feel my way through. We built new routines. She helped me water the plants. We made pancakes on Saturdays. She picked out a book every night, sometimes the same one, and I read until she drifted off. Some nights she crept into my room and curled up next to me without saying a word. The night she called me Mommy again, out of the blue, halfway through a bowl of cereal, I had to look away for a second, not because I was overwhelmed, but because it felt so right that it scared me. I used to think my life was full. I had a good career, a peaceful home, a routine that worked. I didn't think I needed anything more. That was a lie I had told myself to survive a truth I didn't know was missing. I hadn't chosen this, but now I wouldn't choose anything else. Lena gave me back a part of myself I never knew had been taken. She cracked something open in me that I had locked down for years, not because I didn't want love, but because I thought I didn't deserve it. The world had stolen something from both of us. A first cry, a first step, a first birthday, all those moments we should have shared. We couldn't get them back. But we had this. She was mine. I was hers. Not because a court said so, not because a test proved it, because when she wrapped her arms around me that first day and said, "Mommy, I missed you," something inside me responded before logic ever caught up. I had found my daughter, and somehow she had found me too, not through blood or memory, but through something deeper, a truth that waited at my front door, knocking until I was brave enough to open it. If this story moved you, if it made you think about family, truth, or what it means to belong, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes, the most unexpected moments are the ones that change us forever. I'd love to hear what you think. Drop a comment below. Have you ever experienced something that made you question everything you thought you knew? And if you want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss one. Thank you for watching. I'm Elena, and this was the story of how I found the daughter I never knew I had.